The final version of Choo-Choo Charles ended up being a lot different than the early versions of the game. So what was the game like in the alpha version? How much has changed since the early days? Well, it turns out the game went through a lot of changes. Our favorite lad, Eugene, originally never used to come on our grand adventure with us, which is honestly pretty sad. But there's a whole lot of other changes that I'll be going over in this video. From how the story originally played out, to the final encounter with Charles. 2-Star Games gave me an alpha build of the game to check out, and I even got to interview him about the game. So I hope you enjoy this glimpse into a different world. But before we begin, I want to let you know that I'll also be breaking fantasy games over on my new channel Shield Scuff. From Skyrim to Elden Ring, Horizon Zero Dawn, God of War, and much, much more. The same HorrorScoped content you love, just not on horror games. So if you want to check that out, there's a link in the description. Of course, nothing is changing here, and I have plenty of more horror games to break. So let's do a step-by-step quick breakdown. The game normally shows us Eugene in a phone booth telling us about Charles. We then warp to the island in a canoe, board our train, and then we get jumped by Charles. Eugene dies, and then we must collect 3 eggs scattered around the island and then head to the final altar. It's here where we challenge Charles to a final fight and defeat him, closing out the game. So remember that, because in the alpha version of the game, the intro is a lot different. We actually start the game off in a bar. The introductory sequence is similar, but it isn't the same. So I'm going to let this play out, and I will read off the text because there is no voice acting. So here we go. After the cave-in, I made up my mind that I was finished with the mining business. Of course, we tried to dig him out, but we didn't have enough tools or men on the surface. Was a horrific time, youngster, and that's not even the last of this story. Before the week's end, before we'd even given up hope on those men's lives, people started going missing on the surface. One gone Friday, another gone Saturday, and then I saw him myself. A spider, big as a house, with the body of a train. I may sound like a drunken fool to you, but I know what I saw. Not just myself even, but lots of others saw it as well. Even got this little beauty before I left. I can tell you don't believe me, but I tell you what, I own one of the mining trains on the island that I'll sell you. And I can get you a ride there with a supply boat. What do you say? Are you up for a little monster hunting? So before we move on, let's take a look around this cutscene, this bar environment. Now this area does not show up in the final version of the game, obviously, but if we look around here, we can see some different things. For one, the opening cutscene has who I believe is either the man on the docks or the man who died in the water, serving as the bartender. And the bartender's animation just sort of loops. It plays over and over again. But due to the camera movement in this cutscene, the player may never notice this. There is also a woman at the bar, and if we move the camera around, we can see that she's just floating. She is not sitting on a stool, she is levitating through magic. She's also barefoot at a gross bar environment, which is, questionable. So if we move outside of the bar, we will see that there is a bright, blinding light surrounding this entire area. And the bar itself is only a sliver of a room. It's a cutaway and not a fully baked out room. But on one of the walls, we can see some artwork. And some of these are some Easter eggs. For one, we can see this crescent shape. And it's actually, to my understanding, a nod back to the developer's previous game, My Beautiful Paper Smile. It matches up with the art style and the creepy smile from that game. Among this, there are some other artwork on the wall, and there is one in particular that looks like a pile of crap with the word Jimmy written next to it. Not sure what that's about. I actually got this alpha build after interviewing Gavin from 2-Star Games. So once this cutscene ends, there is now a 2.5 month time warp, and then the game starts. And instead of riding in on that canoe or that boat, we are at a camp and our train is nearby instead. So there's no Eugene, we don't go up to a train shed, and we are just sort of camping out here. Our train is already armed and ready to go, and we can look around this campsite where we've been staying to find some notes to fill us in. So probably the most interesting thing to me in these notes is the introduction to a character called Christopher. To my knowledge, I don't believe there was a character in the game called Christopher in the final version, so this is pretty interesting. Now, of these notes around this campfire that touch on the lore, there is one that is more interesting than the other two. And the reason is, it shows us a drawing of the prism on top of the altars. So there's this sketch on this note that basically tells you exactly what needs to be done. And it essentially outlines the same goal as before in the final version of the game. You put 3 objects within this thing to summon Charles. But this right here sheds a ton of light on a mystery from the final game. The mystery of those dang altars scattered all around the island. So in the final version of the game, we have the main altar that we summon Charles at for the final fight, but all around the island are these mini altars. And these miniature altars always seemed really important, almost like there was a secret or an Easter egg hidden within. But it turns out in the alpha version of the game, these altars were everywhere. I counted like probably more than 8, maybe 10 around this entire map. And apparently you can summon Charles at any of these altars in the alpha version, which I'll touch on and show later. But in our interview, 2-Star Games had this to say about these altars.
Anyone who's played the game or has watched videos, there are like some random small stone ruins around the map. And originally you were going to take the 3 eggs that you get from the mines and you were going to put them on one of those one of those smaller shrines. And then I would just summon a normal Charles, and it would just be a normal Charles fight essentially, but he would be a little bit stronger, a little bit faster, and then once you gunned him down enough, he would just fall over dead.
So leaving these in the game is kind of like the ultimate Easter egg, at least for me. It reminds me of those gaming mysteries I experienced as a kid, because when I found these altars in the game, I knew there was something odd about them, but there was nothing I could do with them, so it was this overarching mystery. It just felt like they were a secret, but it's cool to know they're a leftover asset. So in the alpha version, there's a lot less to do than the final version of the game. There's not as many side quests unless I just missed them. But while driving around, you can see that this environment is not actually finalized. For example, in the railroad, it's very common to see rocks and debris just clipping through the railroad tracks. Around the island, Charles is always wandering. There is no event that makes him appear, like in the final version of the game. He is always roaming the countryside. And now his walking animation wasn't very scary either. It felt very mechanical and not quick like a scurrying spider. And I remember 2-Star Games talking about this in a devlog. But when asked about it in the interview, he mentioned this.
Charles' AI has gone through a lot of different iterations. There's a lot of different things that I had to add as time went on to make the AI more versatile and more fun.
And that makes a lot of sense. You want to make sure you tweak the AI as much as possible so that your token monster, the main threat in this game, is as sinister and oppressive as it can be. And in the alpha version of the game, we can see that the Charles AI was in an in-between state before it was finally perfected. So something interesting that was cut in the final version was something related to the cultists. Because when you encounter a cultist in this game, like in the mines, they actually have a flashlight tethered to their shotguns. Now this was ultimately removed, but the lighting effect actually makes it a bit easier to see them when they're turning off camera, so you know that they're moving. The problem being, it's on the shotgun, which is pointed towards the floor, so it's sort of off to the side and not direct. But I'm sure you're all curious about that final Charles encounter. So once again, there is no main altar. You do not go to that giant temple. It does not exist in the alpha. You just make it to any of the many altars all around the island with your 3 eggs. You insert them, and then a giant beam of energy fires off into the sky. And what's even more interesting is that Charles does not get powered up. He does not absorb the energy from the eggs. In fact, he is nowhere to be seen because Charles does not teleport to your location. So you have to wait for Charles to walk across the entire map to get to your altar before you can begin the final fight. This definitely diminishes the hype of the final encounter, and I can totally see why this was changed. Something else that's pretty bizarre is that a fully decked out train can outrun Charles, and he can't teleport. He can't even get close to the train. At some point during the final fight, he was so far away from me that I basically had to wait for him. It feels very one-sided, but in the alpha version of the game, I also believe there was less scraps. So I believe people may not even have a fully decked out train. But when I finally defeated Charles, I hit him with the boomer, and that rocket shot off, and it turned into a slow motion sequence as it collided with Charles, and it pushed him off the track and to the side. He explodes into blood with a very odd camera angle, and then the credits roll with placeholder names. And when we exit the game and boot it back up, we can find Charles dead floating in the air. He is severely burned, and he cannot take further damage. However, we can burn him with a flamethrower, but nothing else happens. Also, we can take the train and drive right through him, but our character ourselves cannot walk through him. And yeah, he'll just sort of sit here. There are no other Charles on the map. If we try to summon Charles again, nothing will happen. This is how the alpha version ends, which is totally fine because again, this was for testing purposes. So this brings us to the end of the video, but there is one last fun fact that I want to talk about. And that is the name of Choo-Choo Charles before it was called Choo-Choo Charles. And that name, as 2-Star states,
the first idea that came to mind was Train Boy. I don't know. It was a pretty bad name. I was trying to come up with something better.
Gavin goes on to mention that there was a YouTuber by the name Trainboy as well, and that was one of the reasons why it was changed, but truthfully, he just wasn't sold on the name, which I can understand. But anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you're interested in other game-breaking videos, check out my other channel, Shield Scuff, where I'll be breaking tons of fantasy games. Thanks for watching, and cheers.